This video is going to be made in order to show more clearly the kind of carburetor linkage that is necessary for the throttle valve pressure to be managed through the carburetor for an automatic overdrive AOD transmission that has been swapped into this 1973 Mustang. It's an unusual kind of swap that in past years, but there's still a question as to what kind of linkage we need to manage the throttle valve pressure with the AOD transmissions. Now, this is important because if an AOD does not have the proper initial throttle valve pressure setting, it can lead to a transmission being destroyed due to lack of pressure for the clutch plates inside the transmission when the car is being driven. So I'm going to cut here and then take off this air filter and give a close-up with an explanation as to what's going on. Okay, this is our 750 CFM Holley with a vacuum secondary diaphragm that is set up to work with an AOD transmission. The standard cable to open the throttle is right here. The cable that manages the throttle valve pressure is right here. It starts with an attachment here, a small, large adjustment, ferrule nut, cable itself, and it goes all the way back here, and from there you can see where its chrome sheath goes behind the engine and then down to the transmission. Well, it's kind of hard to see, but that's where it goes. Now, the important part is that the mounting for this cable is on the one driver's side rear mounting bolt for the carburetor. It hooks right to there. It also has a couple of helper return springs to help bring the throttle back to where it belongs in case this cable gets a little bit hung up. The cable itself is adjusted for large adjustments through this ferrule nut up front, and for small adjustments there is a nut on this one side of the mounting plate and a nut on the other side for the threaded cable sheath. Now, the adjustments are made with the engine running in neutral, not park. If you do this in park, you'll get an incorrect reading on your oil pressure gauge. But here we have a special tool. This is one that I made. You can buy them if you want. It basically is a 0.275 inch thick gauge block. In this case, I took a 5/16 inch nylon bolt and I flattened two sides of the bolt until I had 0.275 inches in thickness. That is 5/16 of an inch. That's a little bit less. Then I cut a slot down the length of the bolt. The reason for that slot is so the measuring bolt can be put over on top of the cable. Now that's not where the block goes. Where the block goes is between this adjusting nut and this plastic throttle retention piece. Now, I can't do this with one hand, so I'm going to cut the video, put this block in place, and explain how and why I did that. Okay, I put the adjusting block in place. And there it is, between that ferrule nut and the end of that carburetor link for the throttle valve pressure cable. And what this does is when the engine is idling, warmed up, in neutral, it puts a little bit of pre-tension pressure on this cable. And it causes the automatic transmission throttle valve to increase the line pressure of the transmission, which is the hydraulic pressure used to manage the transmission so that it gets its upshifts and downshifts done correctly at the right time and applies the proper pressure on the clutch packs and the servos in order to get the transmission to work the way it's supposed to. I have another video, actually a few, that I have already made on how to adjust the throttle valve position cable. I will put the links to those videos in the description of this video. There didn't seem to be any sense of me redoing that, especially when mine is set correctly at this point. Or actually, I have it set a little higher than factory. Factory says 30 to 35 pounds per square inch of throttle valve pressure in neutral when idling. I have mine set at 39. Higher pressure is not going to hurt. Pressure is too low is what damages the transmission. The reason I went to 39 pounds instead of 35 is I wanted the road speed to be a little higher for the 1-2 and 2-3 and 3-4 upshifts. I wanted the upshifts to be a bit firmer, but I didn't want to go out and get a shift kit or make other modifications to the transmission itself. In my case, I got what I was after. I will also put a link in this description for a place where you can get this throttle valve pressure cable kit. I don't know if they have separate kits for Holley carburetors and other carburetors other than Holley, or if there's one type that fits everything. I can tell you that this Lokar, Lokar.com, this Lokar solution has been working well for us. So I have made the last adjustment about 2 years ago. I am going to be installing an LED gauge to put inside the car so I can monitor the AOD throttle valve pressure during different driving conditions. That's mostly just so I have something fun to play with, but also in the event that something happens and I'm not getting the correct cable pressure for some reason, and the throttle valve pressure drops below 39 pounds, or worse yet, under 30 pounds, I would like to know before I burn up the transmission. So that's the other reason I'll put that in. That's going to be a different video for whenever I do that. This is a little closer look at this nylon bolt that I modified in order to make my own 0.275 inch thick adjusting gauge for our AOD Throttle Valve Pressure adjustment. As you can see, if I hold the flat ends away and toward me, you see the threads of the nylon bolt. If I turn it 90 degrees, now you are seeing the flat side over here. No more threads. That thickness is 2.75 inches thick. Now, I cut a length down the middle of the bolt so I could slip this over the throttle valve adjusting cable. And I was doing that because I thought I would need to use a nylon nut along with this threaded unit. Where'd it go? Here it is. In order to secure it on the cable so it wouldn't fall off. Well, it turns out that there's enough tension with the two halves of this bolt to where this grips the cable just fine. I have not ever needed to use the nut to help retain it, but I keep it on hand just in case a day comes where I might need it for some reason when I adjust one of these things for somebody else. Because not everybody is going to have their carburetor set up the way ours is set up to work with an AOD. Most folks that I know of, they don't make their own gauge. They buy the metal one, which I was fine doing. But if I could make one that works just as well, I didn't feel like waiting around for a couple of days for it to show up. So I just went out and made one. And, well, it works just fine. In fact, I think it works better than a metal one. So there you go. Nothing that a coarse file of vise to hold the bolt and little time is needed to shave down the two sides of the bolt, nylon bolt, in order to make your own 0.275 inch thick gauge. Well, this Lokar kit that I picked up for Mr. Z in Poland actually came with the 0.275 inch thick adjusting gauge for the throttle valve pressure adjustment. So instead of having to fabricate a spacer like I did with a nylon bolt, this one comes with the kit. So I'll be sure that this is part of what I ship to Poland, and it is the proper thickness to adjust that AOD. Today I am working on our 73 Mach 1 Mustang, but the job is not intended to be for our car, because that work that I'm going to be showing how to do is already done. Rather, this is going to show how the throttle valve pressure control cable is set up and installed on an engine with a Holley carburetor. And it's fairly simple. Gotta have the right parts though. A Ford with a 302 engine or 351 with an automatic overdrive AOD transmission that requires a throttle valve pressure control cable. I'm using Lokar kit KD-2A OD-HT. Now this comes in different kinds of finishes: black, shiny, chrome, stainless. I just happen to pick this because, well, it's a stainless finish that will look good for a long time, and it's what I installed on our Mach 1. In order to mount this to the Holley carburetor properly, requires a small bracket to be installed, and it includes 2 springs to help make sure the throttle pressure valve control cable returns to its lower setting when the throttle is closed, so we don't have a runaway pressure situation. Well, I'll be more glad if I can use it without hurting myself. Okay. Okay, here we have our carburetor mounting bracket. And we have a small little arm. There's a wire tie holding this together. I'm going to leave that there so we don't end up losing a part. So the idea is to orient this on the carburetor while the driver's side rear mounting stud comes through this slot. And then this whole bracket gets pushed back as far as possible against the throttle base of the carburetor, and then the mounting nut gets tightened back down. And there's a small adjusting screw with a lock nut here that will angle this away from or closer into the carburetor so you can get proper bracket alignment for the cable. Now the cable itself, this is going to be the tricky part.
Couple more minutes.
And there's 2 ends to this cable. One end goes down to the AOD transmission, and then this bracket gets attached to the shift shaft assembly. That can be done externally without having to remove the transmission oil pan or the valve body or any other part. And it can either approach from in front of or from behind the AOD transmission, depending upon where the linkage is located and oriented on the transmission. On the carburetor side, it's a little bit trickier. This kit actually has the stud for the carburetor as part of the kit itself. Okay, there's a little ferrule nut here, and to remove that nut, Lokar provides a small Allen wrench. So you loosen this nut set screw, take off the ferrule nut, take off the carburetor linkage, and then slide this sheath through that larger hole. You want to take this off first so that you can get the entire length of that in here. I don't think you're going to need this mounting bracket at all. Now that I'm looking at it, is everything you need is right here. So that goes in this mounting hole. Once that is done, then this bracket will be holding onto the throttle end, and you can tighten this down. And once you have that tightened down with this bracket, this smaller hole here or here, you would connect to the return spring at what I will call the short end, and then finding a suitable place on the engine somewhere, and I'll take a look and see if I have it somewhere, attach the spring to a good mounting location. So here I'm showing the return spring for the throttle valve pressure cable attached to the bracket, and the other end attached to a small bracket on the carburetor. And a small bracket looks like what this little piece is for. Okay, so the final assembly looks like this. You can see where the stainless steel bracket is held onto by the carburetor hold down nut. You can see where the throttle comes in and is locked down in place. And you can see here where the end of the shaft right there is connected to the carburetor's throttle linkage, and there you see the ferrule nut with a little bit of cable extending beyond it. Now, this nut right here is where you make your large adjustments to tighten up the slack in the throttle cable. When you have your oil pressure gauge installed and the engine running in neutral, and you want to adjust this to 35, 36, 37, 39 pounds per square inch of pressure, you do it by loosening this retaining nut back here, lock nut, and loosening this nut, then moving the shaft of the cable back and forth. And when you finally get things tightened up to where you want them to be, as far as the oil pressure is concerned, you simply tighten this nut down tight so these two nuts are holding on to the bracket. Gee, I sure hope that makes a lot of sense. It feels like it should, but that's because I've already got mine done. I have another video that shows more clearly how this end of the cable connects to the AOD at the shift shaft, and I will put the link for that video in the description for this particular video. I do hope that helps out.